In October 1347, 12 ships docked in Sicily. Most of the sailors were already dead. The ones still breathing had black swellings the size of eggs at their necks and groins. They came off the ships. They walked into the city. And within 4 years, the plague that came off those ships would kill half of Europe. This is the story of the Black Death. The galleys had come from Caffa, a Genoese trading colony on the Black Sea, more than 2,000 miles to the east. By the time they reached Messina, the crew was dying at the oars. A Franciscan friar named Michel de Piazza watched them arrive. He wrote it all down. He described sailors with a sickness in their bones. Black boils. Blood vomited up onto the deck. The people of Messina understood, very quickly, that something terrible had come ashore. They drove the ships back out to sea. It made no difference. The disease was already inside the walls. Rats had already run down the mooring lines. Fleas had already jumped from the rats. Within weeks, Messinians were dying in their houses. By Christmas, they were fleeing into the Sicilian countryside. They carried the plague with them. To understand what happened next, we have to go back a year, and east. 1346, the Crimean port city of Caffa. A Genoese outpost on the Black Sea, walled, rich, and under siege. The besiegers were a Mongol army of the Golden Horde, led by Cohn Beg. According to a near-contemporary account by the notary Gabriel de Temusi, plague had already broken out in the Mongol camp. De Temusi claimed the Mongols catapulted their own infected dead over the walls of Caffa. Historians still debate whether that siege itself was the spark. But this much is certain. The Genoese ships that fled Caffa carried something with them. Not just on the men. On the rats. And on the fleas the rats were carrying. The bacterium was Yersinia pestis. We know that for certain because in the 2010s, scientists pulled its DNA out of the teeth of plague victims buried in a mass grave in London. A 650-year-old killer, identified by its genome. The flea bites the rat. The rat dies. The flea, still hungry, jumps to a human. And so it begins. From Messina, the plague moved with terrifying speed. By January 1348, it was in Genoa and Venice. By spring, Marseille. By summer, the papal city of Avignon was burying the dead by the cartload. It reached Paris by August 1348. It crossed the English Channel and landed at the port of Melcombe Regis, in Dorset, in late June 1348. London by autumn. York by the following spring. Norway by 1349, carried, according to one chronicle, on a single ship that drifted ashore with every soul aboard already dead. 18 months. That is how long it took a microbe carried by a flea to move from a Sicilian dock to the northern edge of Scotland. There had been pandemics before. None had ever moved like this. And no one understood what was happening. They only knew that everyone was dying. The Black Death took 3 forms. The first was bubonic. A flea bite, usually on the leg. Within days, the lymph nodes swelled into hard black lumps, the buboes, at the groin, the armpit, the neck. Fever. Vomiting. Skin darkening as the small blood vessels burst beneath it. Most of the infected died within a week. The second was pneumonic. The bacterium reached the lungs, and from there it no longer needed the flea. A cough. A sneeze. A shared breath in a closed room. That was enough. The pneumonic form killed almost everyone it touched, sometimes within 2 days. The third was septicemic. The bacteria entered the bloodstream directly. A victim could be healthy at breakfast and dead by nightfall, the skin already turning black. That is where the name came from. Not the plague. The black. Medieval physicians had no idea what caused it. Some blamed a poisonous corruption in the air, a miasma rising from swamps and unburied bodies. Others blamed the alignment of Saturn, Jupiter, and Mars in the sign of Aquarius, in March 1345. The medical faculty of Paris, asked by the king to find the cause, issued an official explanation. It blamed the planets. The prescriptions were bloodletting, prayer, lancing the buboes with red-hot iron, drinking pulverized emerald, fleeing the city. None of it worked. The only piece of advice that ever helped was, in the words of one chronicler, leave quickly, go far, come back slowly. We know what it looked like because people wrote it down while it was happening. In Florence, the poet Giovanni Boccaccio described a city where the living were too few to bury the dead. Bodies were stacked at the doors of houses each morning, like merchandise, in his words. Fathers abandoned children. Wives abandoned husbands. Whole households shut their doors and were never opened again. Trenches were dug at the churchyards, the dead layered with thin sprinkles of earth between them. In Avignon, the personal physician of Pope Clement VI, a surgeon named Guy de Chauliac, wrote a clinical description that doctors would still study 6 centuries later. Chauliac caught the plague himself. He survived it. He kept writing. The Pope, on his physician's advice, sat for weeks between 2 enormous fires in his chamber at Avignon. The reasoning was wrong. The treatment may have helped anyway. The heat seems to have driven the fleas away. He lived. So did most of his household. A few miles from the fires, the city of Avignon was burying as many as 400 people a day. Just outside the walls of London, on a riverbank called East Smithfield, the city dug a mass grave. 5 layers of skeletons deep, head to toe, no coffins. The trench was filled and reopened, again and again, through the autumn of 1348. It is the same pit where, 6.5 centuries later, scientists would extract the DNA that named the killer. When you cannot stop a thing, you look for someone to blame. In the German lands, columns of men appeared on the roads. They called themselves the Brotherhood of the Flagellants. They walked from town to town, stripped to the waist, beating themselves with knotted leather scourges weighted with iron tips. They believed God had sent the plague to punish humanity. They believed their suffering might draw it back. It did not draw it back. Pope Clement VI, still alive between his 2 fires, condemned the movement in 1349. Worse was happening in the same towns. A rumor spread that Jewish communities had poisoned the wells. There was no evidence. Jews were dying of the plague at the same rate as their neighbors. It did not matter. On the 14th of February, 1349, in the free city of Strasbourg, a Christian mob seized the entire Jewish population of the city. Hundreds of men, women, and children, by some accounts as many as 900, were taken to a wooden platform built on the Jewish cemetery and burned alive. The Strasbourg killings happened before the plague even reached the city. Similar pogroms tore through Basel, Mainz, Cologne, and dozens of other towns across the Rhineland. Pope Clement issued 2 papal bulls trying to stop them. The killing went on. Many of the Jewish communities of Central Europe never recovered. Those that survived fled east, into Poland, where the king offered them protection. This was the other face of the Black Death. Not the disease. The thing the disease did to the people it did not kill. By 1351, the first wave was burning itself out. Across Europe, between 30 and 60% of the population was dead. In some regions, entire villages had simply ceased to exist. In England alone, archaeologists have mapped more than 1,500 medieval villages that were abandoned during or shortly after the plague. Fields stood unharvested. Mills stopped turning. A traveller riding north from London in 1352 could pass through parishes where no smoke rose from any chimney. Half of Europe was gone. Not killed in a war. Not deported. Just gone, into pits, into mass graves, into the silence after the bell stops ringing. And then, slowly, something the powerful had not expected began to happen. The peasants who were left started asking for more. There was no one to bring in the harvest. No one to shear the sheep. No one to swing a hammer in a half-empty village. For the first time in centuries, ordinary labor was scarce. And when labor is scarce, labor is expensive. Wages, in many parts of Western Europe, doubled within a generation. Lords who had once commanded unpaid feudal service now had to pay. Some lost their lands entirely. In England, a panicked parliament passed the Statute of Labourers in 1351, trying to cap wages at pre-plague levels and forbid peasants from leaving their manors. It did not work. There were simply not enough workers to force. Within a few generations, serfdom, the system that had bound peasants to the land for nearly 1,000 years, was collapsing across most of Western Europe. Peasants negotiated. Peasants moved. Peasants, in some places, bought their own freedom. It was not paradise. The plague would come back, in 1361, in 1369, again and again, for the next 300 years, until the last great European outbreak at Marseille in 1720. And Yersinia pestis is still with us. It lives in wild rodents in the American Southwest, in Madagascar, in Central Asia, even today. The bacterium has not gone anywhere. The world at once unmade has. The Black Death did not end the Middle Ages. It is more honest to say it ended one Middle Ages and started another. The world that came out of the plague had fewer people, higher wages, weaker lords, deeper doubts, and the first stirrings of a different kind of Europe. 12 ships docked in Sicily, in October 1347. And civilization, as their generation had understood it, did not survive the winter. If this changed how you see the Middle Ages, subscribe. We reconstruct a lost world every week.